In 1954, it happened. Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute barrier. The reason that we're talking about this story is there's two things that are really important when talking about humans and selling systems. Number one, the mindset of each individual matters a lot. And number two, how an entire organization telling you can't do something actually creates a situation where you can't do something. Hi, I'm Scott Santucci. I'm the President and Chief Growth Catalyst with Growth Enablement Ecosystems. This video is about humans and systems, and it's about sales as a team sport, but everyone's involved and they see the game differently, and it's incredibly important in today's world. And if you're going to sell what's possible, we have to understand all these variables. What are we going to cover? The first thing that we're going to cover is achieving what's possible is timeless. Human beings have always achieved what's possible. The second thing is biases create self-limiting thoughts. And in today's information overload society, the science that we tell ourselves actually creates more and more self-limiting thoughts. The last point is that revenue generation is a team sport. We need a construct to be able to think about that so that we can actually design in sales, marketing, and other folks, because it's not good enough to talk about sales and marketing alignment. It's about an ecosystem. So what? What you're going to do is need to install some new software and come up with a viewpoint and really think through what does your selling system look like in today's modern economy. So I already mentioned that story about Roger Bannister, and I want you to just take a look at this particular picture. This is exactly the moment where he's breaking that event, and look at how compelled everybody is, and look at the low tech involved. Now, the thing that makes this particularly more amazing is that in 1593, that's when the standard length of a mile was established, and it's been 425 years between then and the beginning of 2019, 425 years of total elapsed time. During that 425 years of elapsed time, there was 361 years where no one broke that mile. Think about that, 361 years. That's amazing. Basically, through 85% of that elapsed time, only one human being in the world and throughout time had accomplished that feat. In the 15% of time since then, 1,526 athletes have broken that barrier. Why is this significant? Because before 1954, actually in the 20s, the science came out and people said it was physically impossible. Many doctors believed you could die if you tried to run that fast. So the medical science, the experts, everybody said it couldn't be done. All it does is take one person to break it, and now 1,500 people, over 1,500 people have broken it in less than a 15% time. The point is, this story happens over and over again, whether it be going to the moon, whether it be radio, whether it be cars, you name it, coming up with something what's possible is timeless. Now, why is this so important for us today? It's so important for us today because our entire economy is driven on things that weren't even conceived of. Uber didn't exist in 2009. Didn't even exist. That's when they were founded. Didn't exist in the old economy of 2008. Today, the idea of taking a cab is barbaric. You just go on your app and be able to do it. That is what's possible. Another example of what's possible is that AMC Movie Studios is in the process of a major transformation, turning itself into a hospitality, not a movie theater, because that's the economy, and they're competing for experience dollars. They are becoming restaurants and all kinds of things where they want you to go into their studio and spend as much money as you can in their theater. Sorry, not their studio. So really, the key quote that is super salient here as we go and unpack some more things. We're going to talk about two things about bias and then talk about some systems ideas. But it ain't what you don't know. that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. Fantastic quote by Mark Twain. Our sales forces, our marketing departments, everything that we're doing to sales is chock full of things we know for sure that just ain't so. So let's talk about how our biases prevent us from realizing what's actually going on. What this is actually a homework assignment. My mother worked for a large public county school district, and one winter there was a lot of snow, and the homework assignment in 4th grade was to write an essay about what your mother does. And this was the homework assignment that was turned in, or the picture of it. What I'm going to ask you to do is just think about this. Now, don't just participate passively in this video. Just think about this. I use this in a lot of working sessions in groups, and I ask the group to tell me, what is this a picture of? And I keep quiet, and I ask the audience inevitably what they think. And most often response is, well, that's a stripper. Well, what's interesting about that is this is a fourth grade picture. The homework assignment was turned in the next day with a note from the mom. And let me read this real quickly. Dear teacher, I want to be perfectly clear on my child's homework illustration. This is not of me on a dance pole on a stage in a strip joint surrounded by male customers with money. I work at the Home Depot, and I commented to my daughter how much money we made in the recent snowstorm. This is a drawing of me selling a shovel. Now, the point of this is it's very easy. Number one, let's think about the girl who drew this. She doesn't have the skills to draw what's in her head. So she's trying to communicate as best as she can. We as adults expect a more sophisticated, higher-end drawing. Well, she's experiencing something for the first time, and it's a very human activity to draw not pure depictions of things that are going on. This is an environment all of your salespeople are dealing with today, as they are unable to describe for you the details that's happening with them. The second thing that's happening is we're the ones, if you thought this was a stripper on a pole dance, we're the ones who are projecting that bias. We're not seeking the meaning of what's going on here. So the reason that I like this is it's a lightweight example, but it causes us to think through. If we know for sure salespeople are coin operated, or if we know for sure 70% of buyers are through a buyer's journey before they ever interact with sellers, then we're not going to explore and be curious about what's really happening. So it's not soft science, it's brain science. Now, one of the biases that I brought to the table in studying sales enablement, way back when I started the sales enablement research practice at Forrester Research, I had a very strong bias that if you didn't measure it, it didn't exist. And I didn't really think things like culture or dealing with human emotion was really science and therefore shouldn't be factored in. Well, what's interesting is since 2008, there's been a tremendous amount of work in neuroscience and the study of brains and how they work. And what we know today is that our brains behave and react in very predictable ways during uncertain events. And there are a whole litany and a whole exploding field of research around biases, but I'm going to share a few of them that are super common and relevant to what we're dealing with today. So one bias is in a state of constant change, there's a bias of certainty. Some of us desire order. A lot of us desire order. Geez, we want to make things very clear as much as possible. And when things are chaotic, we get very uncomfortable, some more than others. Another thing is a lot of us are wired to just action or just act. And sometimes the worst thing to do is when you're in a constantly changing mode is to act without thinking. Another thing is that we're wired for correctness or in order, a form of order is being right. And the rightness comes from tons and tons and tons of subject matter expertise. And if you think about it, as sales becomes more and more a team sport, think about all of the different subject matter experts, ranging from various product marketers in different fields to subject matter experts, sales engineers or consultants or whom have you. The level of detail and preciseness and rightness in each one of those siloed fields is increasing, and the number of people that we have to work with is also increasing. So correctness can become a really, really big problem. Another thing is overwhelm. Once we get overwhelmed, our fight, flight, or freeze instincts kick in. Sometimes we don't even know how we're behaving. And that's a very common thing. So we need to be aware of those activities well. Another thing is habits. We can form habits. So we can form a habit that says our sales organization is asking us to call higher, but we've gotten into a habit of calling lower level people. So how do you break those habits is hard. And then, of course, we in our heads make those habits, breaking those habits even harder. And then finally, there's a really, really gigantic aversion to risk. And that risk prevents us from getting outside of our comfort zones. So those are different factors. And when we look at that, this is created a icon that represents this, because I want to go back to that point of each human being has brains, and each of our brains function that. And since sales is actually a communications process, that's a science too. So let's talk about that as a science in a second. And I've mentioned this model map match, and I represent it this way. I get a lot of questions of how come it's not 1, 2, 3 reading left to right. But the reason that we're doing this is that we're actually introducing a concept of systems thinking. Now, one of the things that's really critical is to understand that is if we're actually trying to design a communications process is a flow. And you can go and research systems thinking. I hope you can just trust me that this has all been designed based on those details, and you don't have to read it all. But essentially, in order to design a system, you have to think about it holistically, and that's what the circles are. And the way to design it is, let's work backwards from our customers. Let's model what our customers do, map what we do for it so that we match the right seller behaviors to it. So it's a basic systems thinking. So there you go. You got a design thinking and systems thinking tutorial. Well, really the core focal point is we can design all the systems that we want. If you look at your sales process, it's very clinical, and it doesn't factor in the human condition. But that sales process is driven by human beings on both sides. It's driven by, on the green side, your customers and their human beings, and the human beings on your sales side. So when you think about a system, and on the seller side, if they have the best skills in the world but a poor message, they're not going to connect. If you have the best message in the world but poor skills, they're not going to be able to connect with that buyer. So even if you have the best skills and the best message, it still might not connect, because what happens if you're not talking to the right buyer? So one of the things that we need to think about in terms of the communications theory is that a communications process says we have to be able to have the right messages, and that means we have a whole lot of people who are developing messages inside our companies. It's not just our sellers. It's the whole slew of company, and also what actually is a message. We'll get into that much later, because that's super different depending upon whether you're buying a product or buying a whole slew of products as part of an outcome. And then the next part is sort of the right skills. We don't want to design for the best, because then it's too hard. So what's the right? Use the 80-20 rule. Well, now let's flip over and say, hey, if we've got the right skills and the right message, our communication might not happen. Well, that's because we could be communicating to the wrong person or at the wrong time. So if we even get the best person, so the right skills, the right message at the best person, but we meet them at the wrong time, we're not going to make a value connection. Or if we have the right skills, the right message, the wrong person, but at the best time, that still might not work. So look at all the variables that we have to get at. We have to be able to identify or model out who is the right person that we want to talk to, and what exactly does the right time mean. And no, right time doesn't mean that they have a funded project. So let's get BANT off of the table here for a second, and let's not use some of these things we know for sure that just ain't so get in the way. So this is your value communications process. What we want to do is we want to model messages and the messenger. We want to be able to make sure that we have the right interactions, right engagement, which is bidirectional because that's a conversation among human beings, and the right audience. And this is all modeled off of mathematical principles that you can go and look at, and I'll provide the link on the website if you want to go study this and see if this is scientific. So let's put all these pieces together and see what we're talking about. So what's possible? What's possible is you can break the 4-minute mile, because once somebody does, 1,500 people do. What's possible is you can create new business value out of the products and services that you offer by helping your clients envision what's success. What this looks like is your customers don't know what they're doing. That's the thundercloud. And what you need to do is you need to give them that vision of how to achieve that outcome. So working together, there's a lot of people that we need to be involved, but that's what our focal point is. And we have to recognize that it requires strong vision and strong commitment, just like Roger Bannister had. Let's concentrate now, is that's mapping back to the Roger Bannister example. Now let's talk about overcoming our biases. The first bias that we have to overcome is the example that we shared about is it a stripper or is it a snow shovel? Can we allow ourselves to see something different? And the second thing is overcoming the individual biases involved. So in this particular picture, remember that sphere of all of the different biases that each of us individually do, and many of them are instinctive and we don't really know that we're doing them. Well, guess what? When your customers are threatened by forces that they don't know, they're going to click into that emotive state. Your salespeople are in that emotive state because you're pushing them really, really hard. You're in that emotive state because you feel pushed very hard. And ultimately, how do you create the right vibe and the right culture, the right environment, so that people can be calm and really understand and take the time to appreciate what that insight is? So when we think about this through a communications process and going through the things, the right person, right time, right skill, right message, you have to factor the humans into this process. This is design thinking. Design thinking factors in the human elements. So you don't just say, here's the mechanical process. Step 1, you do this. Step 2, you do this. It doesn't work that way, because in each one of those steps, you're communicating with another human being and going through their biases. So let's unpack this a little bit of what we have to be able to design for. On the audience side, we have to factor in that there's many stakeholders involved, each of them with their own biases. And that's another thing that we have to factor in. Number 1, how do we model out all the stakeholders? And number 2, how do we factor in the human element? And guess what? How many people are involved in message creation? Well, here's a few samples, but dang it, there's a lot of people in terms of field marketing, corporate marketing, demand generation, product BU owners. I could go on and on and on with pricing, et cetera. Each one of those individuals are bringing their own element to bias. How do we get them on the same page? How do we get them to overcome their biases to see what we all need to do to be successful? And then let's think about all the messengers involved. You don't just have one account owner who owns a quota. You have a lot of people, whether they be folks in a call center, inside sales, sales overlays, consultants, sales engineers, account executives, and each one of them have their own perspective and buy-in. So the coming up with the story and coming with how all this stuff fits is incredibly important. The way that we go about doing it is model out your audience. Again, going back to that systems thinking, model out the audience, but also we need to model out their emotions and how they think and what are their common behaviors, so that we can figure out who the right people are and at the right time. We need to go in terms of map out who are all the people, who are all the constituents involved in creating the message, so that we can create the right message strategy that is going to unify all of these different piece parts. Then how do we match all of these different individuals into sort of the idea of what the right skills are so we can complete this circuit? The other thing that we're going to have to factor in at the end of the day too is, since this is about a relationship, which we'll cover in more videos, how do we design the right cadence? Because if we're trying to sell what's possible to an executive and we're having salespeople try to close them every month, that's just not going to work. That cadence doesn't match what the business problem is. So we need to be able to factor those things in. So the bottom line of this is, in order to design a human-based system, we need to factor in that there are biases. We need to design it into our process, but just calm down and not try to do everything independently. We can actually leverage the collective genius inside our companies by working together, by modeling and staying focused and modeling all the buyers involved and finding out the lowest common denominator, mapping the value propositions and all into an overall unified story about how we help our clients, and then matching the right skills and the right people to those customer types. So what are the key points that we just shared? What's possible is the key to success. It's the key to success in everything that we're doing, no matter what industry we're in. Each person has bias, and the more people involved in that process increases the combinations of biases that we're going to have to navigate. Your salespeople have to do this. Let's help them by mapping it out and helping them recognize what's going on. We need an overall approach to work together as a team, find ways that individual people don't just ask, well, go, tell me what deliverable to produce. You're really, when you look at a sales team and then the support infrastructure behind it, it's not uncommon to have over 200 people somehow related to that. We need to have more than just say, just tell me what to do. We have to have a way to leverage our humanness. So what? To bring what's possible to customers, we need to recognize that there are more people involved to create many different interpretations and new communication strategies. We've got to develop those, and it starts with understanding some basics. What's next? What we're going to do is cover how do buyers see the world, because the best way to do is work backwards from what they see as valuable. And boy, do we have a very poor understanding of what buyers find as valuable. How many different lenses do vendors have? And how are they looking at customers? And what does an outcome really look like for a customer? Why? We're going to have to work backwards from customers if we want to model, map, and match. So we need to understand and appreciate what their value is. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for more videos.